Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Writing Tip Tuesday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to help other writers become better writers. This week I want to talk to you about a problem that I used to have that I think I may have overcome. That if you have the same problem, I want to give you some tips on how I got to where I am right now, I guess. So I'm the type of person who absolutely hates rereading books. Unless I need to hit a certain nostalgic point of my life where I was when I read that book and I remember how great that book made me feel. Those are the only times that I reread books. And it's not very often. It's very rare for me to reread books. And a discovery from having no interest in rereading books is that there are a lot of times that I have absolutely no memory of if I have read a book, what happened in the book, what the characters are in the book, or anything about it, that I'll be like, oh, this book looks interesting to me. With me having already read it, and I don't remember because I'm bad at names, and books are just sort of names with words inside. I'll pick up the book and I'll get into it, I'll start reading, and then I'll hit something that clicks in my brain, and I'll realize that I had already read it, and that's disappointing because as soon as I realize that I've read it, it all comes flooding back to me and I know exactly what happened in the story, I know what the conflict was, and I don't want to reread it. Since starting this YouTube channel with my Story Study Saturdays, I've started to think a lot more critically about the books that I'm reading, and I remember them now. And I think the change that came through me from doing this has made it so that I've retained what happens in books, and that's awesome. And if I don't retain what happened in the book, I have a resource that I have created for myself, and I guess for you guys as well, for part of it, that tells me what I thought about the book, what the book's general plot points are, the things that'll trigger my memory so I remember what happened and what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, all of that stuff I've got a resource for, and it's there. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and start a YouTube channel. I mean, not everybody wants to do this, and that's fine, but making videos is not the only thing that I do to keep these stories accessible to me in my brain. So I want to share the process that I have from starting to read the book to right before I film, because that's all the stuff that's going to be universal. These are just tips for if you are currently where I was before I started this YouTube channel with your memory and your ability to actively learn from the books you're reading for fun. So my first tip is that you should take notes while you're reading. And I know that's super controversial to some people, and that's fine. I respect it. I respect your general disdain for marking up books. That's fine. You don't have to actually mark up the book if you don't feel comfortable doing that. So I have a couple of different methods that I use for different formats of books. So I will use tabs in physical books and color code them for what that certain thing means. So you don't technically have to mark up every single quote or line or whatever is drawing your attention, and you don't have to write notes in the margins because you can have like a key of what each color means when you're going through. So you don't have to underline or highlight or do anything on the inside of the pages. You don't have to write in your margins. Doing something like this is also going to activate the same part of your brain that is working when you're taking notes. And that's what I would recommend if you don't want to damage your books. If you don't like the look of tabs, but you're okay with writing in your books, use pencil. If you are totally okay with writing in your books, you just haven't done it yet, use some color-coded highlighters and pen if you want to. I also do a lot of my reading on a Kindle, which a lot of e-readers have note systems where you can highlight and just type in a note that doesn't actually affect the page except for the text is highlighted, and then you can just cycle through your note and you don't even have to flip through the whole book to see where you were thinking. Hey there, Editing Sammy here. I realized while I was going through that just now that I did not actually address library books and ebooks, which are both very valuable ways of reading books and getting access to books and enjoying stories and learning from the writing. And I wanted to address that before I dove into what you should be looking for when you're marking your books. So if you are getting physical library books from the library, I would recommend using tabs or just things to mark your pages, like scrap paper, whatever you can get your hands on, to mark pages where you have those standout moments that I'll address in a little bit. I want you to mark the pages so that you don't have to keep a notebook on hand the whole time. It's a lot easier to keep just one of these little bookmarks of sticky notes in your book, in any of your library books, and mark some sections off with those as you're reading, or just like a scrap of paper that you rip off little pieces to mark each individual page that something stood out to you on. And when you have time to sit down with that library book and go through all of those markings, you can write down the quote that stood out to you and like any thoughts you had about it. And that can be your resource because you won't continue to have access to the book with your markings. And it's a temporary thing to mark those pages, and you won't come into damaging a public piece of property or a shared property. As for audiobooks, a majority of the platforms that I have used, which are the Libby app and Audible, have a button on the screen while you're listening that just marks a section. And I think it marks like 15 to 30 seconds before you hit the little mark button. So you've got that marked resource that you can then do the same thing as the library books, where you can write out the words, or if it's an Audible book that you own, you can have that resource where it's the same thing as marking up a physical book, but you still want to make sure that you are marking it and thinking about those things. But I just wanted to put that in because those are two very valuable resources that I just forgot to write down in my notes for filming Sammi to talk about. So here we are. Back to the video. So sometimes that I would suggest you mark, some things to look for or like categories to color code it, would be when you notice something going on in the writing. That's super unspecific. But what I mean is like when you notice something that's like, wow, that line is just so amazing and I can't believe that somebody strung those words together. Mark that. Or if there's something that's like, why would anybody say that way? That's so weird. Why would anybody write that down? Mark those. Anything that you would love to quote, basically. You can also mark when characters feel very, very real. Like this is a very in the moment experience with this character. That is something that I would mark. Or places where a character takes you out, where you're like, I don't feel like you would say that. I don't know why you said that. Anything like that. Anything that strikes you emotionally, any moments where you're reading and you feel something, those moments where you're like, I gotta put this book down, I'm so angry, or like, oh my gosh, I'm crying. Any like emotions. When words on page that you are hallucinating to make you feel something, mark that. And any and all things that stand out to you. If it's standing out, that means it's impacting you in some way. And if it's impacting you, you can learn from it. For whatever reason that it's impacting you. Why is it impacting you? How does it impact you? How does the writing create that impact on you is something you can learn from. And when you're reading for fun, if you read like me, it just sort of goes. You just get through the story. I'm a very fast reader. Going through the story, just getting through it, you experience all of these things, but you're not thinking about them. So taking the time to think about what you're reading to be able to make these notes helps you be a bit more active in your reading, which I hate, because when I was in high school, I was like, I don't want to mark the book. I read the story. It slows me down. And I didn't want to read the books we were reading because they told me that I had to read them. And I was just like a rebellious little kid who didn't want to write in my book. And now here I am years later writing in my books. But it really does help you retain more. It helps activate your brain and make you a more active participant in the reading. And if you're trying to learn about writing through reading other people's stories, that's a really great place to start. It's just being active while you're reading. My second tip is to journal after you finish reading. Either after you finish reading for the day or after you finish reading the whole book. I usually do the whole book because I'm taking notes as I go and it gives me something to fall back on. And when I finish a book, I have a more conclusive thought and I don't have as many questions as I would if I were just writing after every session. But I like to think of it as like a word vomit of, I just finished this book. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling. Here are the moments that are standing out to me right now in my present mind space. Here's everything that I liked. Here's the things that I disliked. Here's the things that I have questions about. And I just throw all of my thoughts out onto like a notebook page, just stream of consciousness about the book until I feel like I've gotten all of my thoughts out and my mind is clear about it. Word vomiting out all of your thoughts and feelings and emotions on your book ties it directly with how you feel and what's important to you, which is you. And your brain will file it away a little bit closer and easier to access when it's more directly related to how you feel about it or what you thought about it, rather than, oh, that was a book that I read that the characters had a story and that's separate from me. Writing out your thoughts allows you to, one, process all of your thoughts and condense them down and work through them, and two, bring your active brain into the equation a bit more than just taking notes while reading does. And even if this is where you stop in your process of trying to retain more of the books that you read, it's still going to give you a physical or digital, if that's how you want to do it, record of all of the books that you have read and your feelings about them. And it gives you a place to reference where if you're like, oh, I feel like I read this book, you can go back through your notebook or your Word document or your Google Doc and see what books you read, if you read any books by this author or anything like that, and just see what you remember about it. I take it one step further from here, and I take all of my thoughts and then I pull out the meaningful things. I pull out the things that stand out to me the most, anything that I repeat in my stream of consciousness, and then I organize it into the structure that I do for my videos, where I start off with a summary of what I remembered from the story. I try not to read the marketing summaries. I try to get what I honestly got out of the story and put that into a marketable summary where I'm not giving away spoilers. And then I go through and I find all of the things that I thought were great about the story, and then I put those into my thoughts section. Then I go through and I find the things that I didn't really like, that I think could be improved, how I think they could be improved, and then what that means for me. And then I go through what I learned and what other people can learn and what I think the book is a good example of, because that's what I do. I want to share it with you. And you can even do that in your own, where you go through and you highlight in green all of the things that were good, and you highlight in red the things that you thought that weren't that great. And you highlight in orange or yellow or blue or whatever, the parts that you know you can learn from, what you can reference the story for in the future. If you want to take it one step further, if you're super type A, super organized, you can make a spreadsheet. I have weirdly been into spreadsheets lately, but you can make a spreadsheet of book, author, your thoughts, all of that stuff that I was just talking about, and keep it somewhere where it's really easy to cycle through, and you can reference it and you can see how many books you've read by this author and how many things you've taken notes on by this author and that author and in this genre or whatever genre. And you can just do that as well, which would be a lot, but it would give you a lot better reference point if you want to take the time to do that. Another tip that I have that's separate from those, though not any less beneficial, is to try and read books with another person, like a buddy read or a book club or whatever it is. So you have somebody to talk to and bounce your ideas off of it and give you something a bit closer to yourself, where the same thing that the journaling does, where it gives you a chance to process your thoughts and give your brain a little bit more to have it stick in there. And it's not quite as great of a reference point as a spreadsheet would be, but it still gives you something that you can talk to somebody else, and gets you to a place where you're able to think a bit more actively about your story without having your story go in one ear and out the other. And it gives you an interesting point of discussion where your opinions might be different than the other person's, or you may have the same opinions and just get a passionate debate about it, which is why I'm always so excited to have book chats in the comment sections of my story study videos, because I love hearing other people's thoughts and seeing how other people's thoughts influence my thoughts and my experience of the story, because where you're coming from makes a difference for how the story impacts you. But those are all of my tips for retaining and learning from more of the books that you read, because it has made a great impact in me and how I think about reading and how I think about writing because of how I think about reading. And I think it can help a lot of other people as well. Even if you don't want to go so far as to make a spreadsheet. If you do make a spreadsheet though, you should let me know in the comments, because I would love that. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button. I'm here every Tuesday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and every Saturday for Story Study Saturdays. If you have anything that you've been working on that you're stuck on that you would love to have a writing tip about, have me look into a little bit closer from a different perspective outside of the problem, give you some advice, I would love to. Just leave me a comment down below. If you have any books you want me to check out for Story Study Saturdays, leave me a comment. But otherwise, I will see you guys on Saturday for a Story Study Saturday.